Now, in one of my first shows this year, I told you that Labor's plan to give permanent settlement to nearly 20,000 people who came here through illegal people smuggling voyages would be a big story and a big problem. Today it's all been confirmed, and even the ABC couldn't avoid the history.
The last time a Labor government changed its immigration policy under Kevin Rudd, thousands of asylum seekers jumped in boats seeking to get to Australia. It's something the Albanese government is eager to avoid.
Yeah, Labor's got to do more than just hope on this one, given it's removing a crucial pillar of strong border protection. And yes, you could be forgiven for thinking it's Groundhog Day.
The opposition's also pursuing Labor over reports the Australian Federal Police and other agencies advise the government a change in its immigration policies would lead to more boatloads of asylum seekers.
Yeah, that was way back more than a decade ago, and back then Labor arrogantly insisted it knew better.
We believe we've got the balance right through protecting our borders and deterring people from making risky and dangerous journeys whilst treating people humanely.
What tragic misjudgment, hey? That arrogance in 2008, 2009 led to 800 boats arriving, 50,000 people being churned through detention, at least 1,200 deaths at sea, probably many more. And just last year, Labor was still all at sea on this stuff.
Do you remain committed to Operation Sovereign Borders, and if so, do you support the retention of temporary protection visas?
Yes. Earlier on, I heard half the question and didn't hear all of it. Labor's policy is to support Operation Sovereign Borders. We support offshore processing. We support resettlement in third countries. We don't support temporary protection visas.
Oh boy, now they're in charge of this stuff. Albanese's got a long history on this issue and it's always been characterised by weakness.
I couldn't ask someone else to do something that I couldn't see myself doing. And if people were in a boat, including families and children, I myself couldn't turn that around.
That's what you need. That's what you need for leadership. It's been confirmed late today by The Australian that the incoming Albanese Labor government was warned by the Public Service when it came into government that changes like this could encourage people smugglers. I spoke with former Howard Government Immigration Minister Philip Ruddock earlier, who helped stop the evil people smuggling trade the first time after Labor weakened the regime and the boats had to be stopped again under Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison. I asked him whether today's changes could see the people smugglers start up their trade yet again.
Well, it could certainly do that, but let me put it in context. There are something of the order of 100 million people displaced around the world. And I think it's much higher than that now with what's happening in Syria and Turkey. When we introduced temporary protection visas, the reason was to ensure we honoured our obligation under the Refugee Convention. The Refugee Convention makes it clear that you only have to offer what is called non-refoulement. You do not have to give people permanent residency. You need to ensure that if they're found to be refugees, they can be returned home. The reason we had temporary protection visas was if people turned up using smugglers with money to pay and seeking to say, give us priority over all of those with greater needs that do exist, give us the priority. It meant that we could say, we're not going to accord you priority, you're going to get a temporary permit, and if the circumstances change in your country, you'll be able to be sent home. And so the purpose of temporary protection visas was to ensure people didn't get permanency, didn't get other rights. It meant that you could put the refugee places to use to help those who need help most. And when you know there are more than 30 million refugees in the world, those who come by boat with money to pay aren't necessarily those who need help most.
Well, exactly, and those 19,000 or so in Australia now who are now going to be on the path to permanent residency, that is the holy grail. As I say, why begrudge them that? That's great for them, but isn't there a really real risk here that it could get the people smugglers going again?
Well, I'll go back. Why would you give it to them and deny it to people who have a greater need for safety? Because the people who were going to be returned home were people found no longer to have a need for refugee protection. So you're taking places for people who want a migration outcome, not in needing of protection, to deny others who are in greater need the opportunity to do so. And why wouldn't those who are smugglers exploit that argument by saying to people outside of Australia with money to pay, we can get you a place over others in greater need by simply putting you on a boat? I don't think it's worthy of Australia to be pursuing policies of providing refugee resettlement in that way.
That's always been the problem, hasn't it? The people who come by boat taking those places of others who might be in greater need. Labor will say that the other measures in place, our maritime patrols and the threat of offshore processing, will mean that you won't get people smuggling again, that this is like a one-off granting, I suppose, of these special conditions. Do you have great hope that that could be the case, or have we seen this movie before?
Well, I think we have seen it before, and what I know is that it only takes a small change for thousands of people to turn up, and that's what Kevin Rudd found. You know, I mean, he made what he thought was a small change. It's not going to really stop people coming, and he ended up with this very large number of people. I think it was, 19,000 now that still have to be resolved, but there were even greater numbers than that.
Well, having seen what unfolded when you were the First Minister who was charged with having to try and stop the arrival of hundreds of boats and thousands of people, and then seeing it happen again under Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, and again Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison stopped the boats, with the risk of this happening a third time, what would your plea be to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese? What should he do now to make sure that this does not signal a return to people smuggling?
My plea is that the government should put more effort into resolving the situations that create refugees. I mean, I've spent in my retirement time working for the Rohingya people, 1 million that have been displaced from Burma and now in Bangladesh. We can't take the 1 million, but if we can secure a situation where they can go home in safety, we can do it far better. And I think the priority ought to be looking to resolve situations abroad that create refugees so that we're not faced with this dilemma.
Well, let's hope that we don't see people smuggling start up again and the arrival of boats. Obviously, our defence authorities, border protection authorities will be on the lookout in the weeks and months to come. While I've got you though, Philip Ruddock, I want to just ask you one other question without notice, and that is, as a former Indigenous Affairs Minister in this country, I'm wondering whether you support a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament.
If it's done appropriately, of course I'd support it. I am about trying to resolve some of the very difficult issues that face our Indigenous people, but I want to see the answers to the questions as to what the likely outcome might be if you do entrench a voice and it has the potential to be interpreted more widely by a creative High Court. I would want to be satisfied that we weren't leaving those sorts of doors open by the way in which we do it.
Philip Ruddock, thanks so much for joining us.